akonya tena si de na busafo mo amani tia se ensem ekoso ensem ne ebi ani susun ebi nso ani enya asem ketu ade ede ne de anyu na ewo mu na abusafo ehye ensem na ekokokoso na emum no yebekwa kotie ne ewo ho na yaba.
First up, the Bank of Ghana may face mounting pressure to implement a significant cut to its key lending rate as the Monetary Policy Committee begins its meeting today. There's more in this report.
This has been influenced by further decline in inflation rate from 12.1% in July to 11.5% in August this year. The economy has also expanded by 6.3% for the second quarter of this year. These developments are critical in shaping the policy rate going forward. Governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Johnson Isiama, at the last Monetary Policy Committee meeting, promised that they will move quickly to cut the policy rate if fresh data comes across as favorable. But for many, will the current pressure on the cedi be the party spoiler? As some have argued that the central bank should look at how it can use the policy rate to check the recent pressure on the cedi. Or maybe even if the policy rate will be reduced at the end of the Monetary Policy Committee meeting, which starts this morning and end on Wednesday, it could just go down marginally from the current 25%.
Well, as we look ahead, we are joined on Zoom by Dennis Brown, who is Associate Director at Deloitte Ghana. Good afternoon to you. So, do you believe the central bank has enough room to significantly cut the policy rate at this meeting?
Hi, Daryl. Thank you to your viewers and your listeners, and thank you to your observers. So, I mean, I've listened to the argument for pressing on the Bank of Ghana to cut the rate further, and I think they are sound because in between time we've seen significant improvement in the macro economy. We've seen growth in the macro economy. We've also seen inflation drop down to about 11.5%. I think the lowest since 2021, December or so. All of which points to the fact that the major cuts that was done in July by the MPC, I think about 300 basis points, seem to have also contributed significantly to reducing the inflationary pressure. As you know, the MPC's main approach is inflation targeting. So the key parameter they look at will be inflation. They look at other things and how that will impact inflation as well, but they look at the headline inflation and how the monetary policy rate will impact the inflation. And we've seen that 300 basis cut has partly contributed to a decline, and a significant decline in inflation, which stood at 11.5% in August. Hence, people are calling for Bank of Ghana to reduce the rate further if it's going to reduce inflation further. But all of this is about a balancing act. So when you ask whether there's room for further cuts, I think they would have to look at it critically. Particularly, we are seeing over the last month or so, the cedi depreciates by between 13 to 15% or so rapidly within just 1 month. It moved from 10 to 12. I think in some places it's moving around 12.5. And as we know, whenever the cedi depreciates, it has a direct impact on our inflation, right? That together with food inflation. I don't know what's happening with food inflation. There was significant improvement a few months ago because of improvements in the food supply chain, which they cited in the MPC report. Well, if that continues, then that could also if you like it be a positive impact that can cancel out the negative impact of the FX as we see it, and maybe leave the monetary policy rate where it is. But I honestly am thinking if Bank of Ghana should take into account the recent depreciation of the local currency, they are probably or most likely to inch up the monetary policy rate a bit in a bid to stay ahead of the curve, right? To be more proactive, not waiting for that lagging impact to play out through the inflation. They might go ahead of the curve by rather inching up the monetary policy rate, maybe by 50 or 100 basis points, just to arrest the impact of the cedi depreciation as we are seeing, which we know is just a matter of time will begin to tell in the headline inflation. So yes, they may have some room for further cuts, but I think they'll stick to a more prudent balancing act, seeing that we are beginning to experience some inflationary pressures through the depreciation of the local currency. That's what I think.
Right. First of all, I wanted to talk about a little bit more about what the considerations would be and how they can find or strike the right balance between supporting growth and maintaining price stability. There are some institutions that have suggested a cut of 300 basis points. Do you think that is feasible at this time?
I think that is really, really ambitious, and for me, it's not a very prudent thing when you think about the balancing, the very delicate balance that needs to be struck. Like I said, we are beginning to see inflationary pressures, even if it's not telling currently because we don't have the September numbers which will come later. We know for a fact that whenever the CD depreciates, and as rapidly as it has over the last 1 month, it's just a matter of time before it tells in the headline inflation. So Bank of Ghana will be aware of that. And if you reduce further the monetary policy rate, what you are doing is rather making spending attractive and creating disinvestment, from those that have excess liquidity. If that is not strongly backed by supply of goods and services, then you have a situation where you have more money chasing fewer goods, and then kitchens demand pull inflation, which is really what the monetary policy rate fights. So when you see Bank of Ghana increasing the monetary policy rate, what they are doing is trying to make spending unattractive, cause people to invest more, thereby reducing liquidity in the system and reducing the demand pull inflation. But if you are not careful, if they keep increasing or anchoring it as high as we've seen in time past, then there's also a negative impact that comes through in the form of cost push inflation, because then businesses that need to fund growth may either scale back or will fund that growth at a higher cost, which will come back through cost push inflation, which is the goods and services that will be supplied anyway but will be supplied at a higher price, which comes back in another form of inflation. So that is why Bank of Ghana would always look at that delicate balance. Where do we place it such that the cost of capital is not too high, and yet we are able to suck liquidity out of the system to avoid demand pull inflation? When the cost of capital is not too high, what you are then doing is supporting growth in the real sector, because then people can have access to funds at a cheaper cost to pursue growth, etc. So that balancing act is always important. These are the some of the considerations they will look at.
I'm going to ask you to look into the crystal ball and try and predict what you foresee the central bank do. What would you advise?
Yeah, I think it has probably already come out in my earlier submission that when I look at the FX, which has an immediate impact in inflation, it's just a matter of time before we see inflation move from maybe 11.5% to 12.5%. They will begin to tell immediately. When I look at that, unless there are other improvements in the other macros which is expected to cancel out the negative impact, I would expect the Bank of Ghana to rather inch up the monetary policy rate, and this will be an attempt to stay ahead of the curve. They see the FX rate, what's happening, they expect for it to translate into increased prices, so they like to stay ahead of that curve by inching it up to absorb the impact that we expect on inflation from the depreciation of the local currency. All right. So I expect for them to inch it up marginally, maybe between 50 to 100 basis points.
All right, thank you so much. We'll be watching Associate Director at Deloitte Ghana, Dennis Brown there. Thank you so much for your time. We're bank to address the press ahead of that meeting. We'll bring that to you when we have.
One wonderful snowy and I'm day and 7 April. I was for Andy and not Macram.